think those same hymn's words are appropriate today. O hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea.
Thank you, Commander Hawke. Our next address is by Mr. Mike Harris, who is the President of the Australian American Association.
Thank you, Don, and greetings to all of our veterans, the ADF personnel present today, including family members and friends of the men who served on HMAS Perth during World War II. My association's treasurer, Teresa Pocco, and I are most honoured to be with you for this 83rd anniversary of this epic battle that saw the loss of HMAS Perth, the USS Houston, and later the Dutch destroyer HNLMS Evertsen. As tradition would have it, we draw together on such a day as this to commemorate and honour this most significant event, which took place on the night of 28th of February 1942, the Battle of the Sunda Strait, one of the greatest battles against overwhelming odds that was fought in the Sunda Strait, which lies between the island of Java and the island of Sumatra, some 2,700 kilometres northwest of Darwin. The Royal Australian Navy cruiser HMAS Perth and the US Navy cruiser USS Houston became engaged in a desperate battle against a Japanese armada of nearly 60 ships. And according to Japanese records, these two Allied ships managed to damage or destroy multiple enemy vessels before finally succumbing to Japanese attack. Commanding the Perth was Captain Hector Waller, whilst the Houston was under Captain Albert Rooks. Tragically, both ships sailed into the heart of the Japanese Western Invasion Force, and after relentless bombardment and multiple torpedo hits, both ships were sunk, first the Perth, and I think an hour later, the Houston. More than 1,000 Perth and Houston men lost their lives on that fateful night, including both of their captains. Survivors of the sinkings faced unimaginable horrors. Some swam to Java's shores and were captured by the Japanese. But a crew member from the Houston named Marvin Sizemore, that's an American name, isn't it, later provided a most harrowing first-hand account of that night, as he described the fury of the battle and the relentless attack on both ships by the Japanese. I will now refer to Marvin's graphic account of the battle. Suddenly, surrounded by enemy ships, the Perth and Houston immediately opened fire and turned sharply to starboard in an effort to break free. However, the fury of the Japanese was not to be denied, and the Perth was mortally wounded by torpedoes. Lying dead in the water, she continued to fire with everything she had until the enemy shells blasted her to pieces, and then she sank. When Captain Rooks realised that the Perth was finished, he turned the Houston back into the heart of the Japanese convoy, determined in the face of no escape to sell the Houston so very dearly. Events were moving fast, and the Houston was also heavily bombarded and in her death throes was about to go down. There was only one idea left in my mind, Marvin states, and that was to join the others who were going over the side in increasing numbers. Quickly I made my way to the port side and climbed down the cargo nets that were hanging there. When I reached the water's edge, I dropped into the warm Java Sea. When my head came to the surface, I was aware that in the darkness I was surrounded by many men, all swimming for their lives. Frantic screams for help came from the wounded and drowning. The sea was an oily battleground of men pitted against the terrors of death. Desperately, I swam to get beyond the reach of the sinking ship's suction. Japanese destroyers had come in close and illuminated the Houston with searchlights as they raked her decks with machine gun fire. Many men struggled in the water near the ship. Others clung desperately to heavy-loaded life rafts. And then, to my horror, I realised that the Japanese were coldly and deliberately machine gunning the men in the water. Dazed and unable to believe that all this was real, I floated there, watching as though bewitched. The end had come. I'll end Marvin's story at that point and continue. and continue on. Some of the men captured by the Japanese were interrogated and some were killed, and those who survived were subjected to extreme brutal conditions. Many were forced to work on the infamous Burma-Thai Railway alongside 60,000 other Allied POWs. Others were sent to Japan to work in the coal mines and iron ore mines. Tragically, only about 25% of these brave men survived to return home to their loved ones. They endured the ordeal of filth, privation, sparse rations, disease, and brutal punishment. But in spite of this, they showed a strength of mind, spirit, humour, and camaraderie
that kept them alive through the darkest period of their lives. But what is vital to remember is the enduring bonds these men formed through their shared sacrifice. Today's service holds deep significance for both Australia and the United States of America because it serves as a solemn reminder of the bravery of the captains and crews of these two ships, and their dreadful sacrifice must not ever be forgotten. Thus, we must forever honour and remember those who defended us, those who made the ultimate sacrifice, and those who endured unimaginable suffering so that we may have the freedom we enjoy in our world today. And lest we forget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for that address. I now call on Captain Jenny to read the commemoration.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for all of those people who did not count their lives dear to themselves, but laid them down for our sakes and for our livelihood. Let the memory of their devotion and sacrifice always be an example that we may live as faithful servants of Him who died for our eternal salvation.